So I live in Georgia, and pretty much this entire week has been in the 30s. So I've literally been freezing my ass off all week. Literally every single day I've been wearing like a hoodie and like 2 jackets. So yeah, I might need to wash this. What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Andres. I'm an Atlanta photographer and videographer. So if you're brand new to the channel and you're into that type of content, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. So recently on Instagram, I did have a couple people DM me about a recent photo I did. And a lot of people have been wondering kind of like my workflow whenever I edit. Whenever I do edit photos, I edit between Photoshop and Lightroom. Recently, I've actually been doing a lot more detailed edits. So I'll pretty much just slap on my preset in Lightroom and then I'll hop into Photoshop and I'll really start doing a lot more detailed stuff like correcting skin, softening skin, really fixing up lighting and skin tones. And then one of the things I've also recently been doing is pretty much dodge and burn. I've been doing this on my last couple of shoots and it's really been stepping on my port. So if you guys aren't already following me on Instagram, my Instagram is Andres Lopez Films. I'll be linking it down below. I shoot a lot of portraits and weddings in the Atlanta area, and I have a very brown moody style. So if that's something you're into, make sure you follow me on Instagram down below. So basically, I'm going to be showing you guys the process I use to edit. I'm currently editing on my MacBook Pro. I've been having this bad boy for a couple years now. I also have a Lacy hard drive on it. I really do suggest picking one of these up if you don't have it already. And I actually have it Velcroed on the back of my MacBook. Basically, that just makes it really convenient. So whenever I'm traveling or if I'm ever in like a moving vehicle, it makes it super easy to edit. Awesome, let's get into this. If you guys follow me on Instagram, you might recognize this photo. This is a recent shoot I did down in a canyon in South Georgia. I've actually been shooting with Kenzie for a while. She's an amazing model, and I actually just started working with her last year. So this right here is the raw image. As you can tell, it's very flat. Whenever I do shoot, I shoot very underexposed. Also, I am a Sony shooter, so I did shoot this on the Sony a7 III with the Sigma 35 1.4 lens. And honestly, the image quality is just fucking amazing. So if I actually zoom into her face, you can really see how sharp that lens is. So the first thing I really do is I just apply my preset. This is the Andres Lopez Films Black and Brown 2020 look. I've honestly been dedicating this entire year to really nitpicking the details in my preset. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm really into the brown and moody style. So I've really been trying to get those colors right this year and just making sure my feed looks really cohesive. So I'm just gonna slap that on real quick. And whenever I do edit in Lightroom, I pretty much just do that, and then I do edit for the exposure. So I'm gonna bring the exposure slightly up. And normally when I shoot, I also crush down the highlights. I don't do anything too fancy with the lighting. I try to keep it, very flat. Whenever I do shoot, I try to shoot in the shade as much as possible, just because it really helps even out the lighting. And then whenever I do edit, I pretty much try to shoot on the warmer side, and I do try to have the tints on the greener side. So I'm gonna bring that down, -7, sweet. And that pretty much just helps with the skin tones a bit. That might have been a little too much. I think bring that up to -5, sweet. And then I'm gonna bring up the exposure a tad bit higher, maybe right there. And then the shadows are looking a little lost. I try to keep as much detail as I can too without overdoing it. So I'm just gonna bring the shadows up a little bit. And then I'm also gonna crop the image a bit. So I'm gonna try to straighten that out. And I know a lot of people don't crop, but honestly, like, this is going on Instagram, so it really isn't such a big issue. As far as colors and lighting, this looks pretty good to me. The next step I'm really gonna do is just open this up in Photoshop and show you guys kind of the more high-end editing I do. Like I mentioned before, this is the preset I use. I'm not gonna show you guys all the details of my preset just because it is kind of like the brand, it is kind of part of my brand. So I don't really want to give out my look for free. Whenever I do edit, I sharpen the image a tad bit. And then I do bring up the vibrance a lot higher just because when I edit, I do bring the saturations down. And that pretty much has worked for me, and it's honestly giving me a really crisp image. A lot of people honestly neglect the tone curve, but you can really use it to either give out a really washed look or a really crushed look. So I like having a very crushed image where the shadows and the highlights are very crushed. So this honestly looks pretty good to me. So now I'm gonna right click the image and then I'm gonna go to edit in and then go into Adobe Photoshop 2021. So now that I have the photo opened up in Photoshop, I'm gonna click on the photo and then I'm gonna hit Command J on my keyboard just to make a duplicate file. And right off the bat, I really like to clean up any type of imperfections. So I'm actually gonna zoom into her skin in a second. I'll clean up anything like creases or pores or like any bumps on her skin. Right off the bat, I just want to say Kenzie has amazing skin, so there's not a whole ton of correction I need to do. So I click J on my keyboard to open up the healing brush tool, and then I'm going to hover over her skin on a very nice clear spot like right here, And then I'm gonna hit Alt on my keyboard, click that to sample that area. And then I'm just gonna go over, let me zoom in a little more. I'm gonna go over any spots that I think need to be cleared up a little bit. And I'll try to sample a spot that's close to that skin tone. I'll sample and then brush, sample and then brush. So this is honestly a really good tool to like just help soften out skin right off the bat. And then I'm gonna make this a little bigger. Also, my laptop is about to sound like a jet engine right now. Holy shit. When I edit, I'm also very nitpicky. So I'm actually gonna edit out some of the hairs that are just kind of falling on her forehead here. So again, I'm gonna sample on the area around it, and then I'm basically gonna brush over the hairs, and they'll just kind of disappear like that. And again, when it comes to this, you can be as detailed as you want. I'm just very nitpicky when it comes to little details like that. For Instagram, honestly, if you're just posting on your social media, it's not going to be a big deal just because the photos are going to look a little more compressed and you won't be able to see, cool. You won't really be able to see big details like that. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to this layer that we just made and I'm going to duplicate it twice. And now I'm going to add all these layers into one folder. And I'm going to rename this folder Frequency Separation. Sweet. So basically, I'm just going to group everything into one, just so I can see the before and after. See, so this right now doesn't look like a big deal just because we did some minor details like fixing up her skin, fixing up some of the hair that went on her face. I'm going to rename these two layers we just made. I'm going to name this one Texture, and then the one right under it, I'm going to name Skin Tones. Perfect. Cool. I'm gonna go up here to filter and then I'm gonna scroll down to where you see blur and then we're gonna add a Gaussian blur. That's gonna help us soften some of the skin later on. So next I'm gonna hit the texture layer. I'm gonna go up to image, scroll down to apply image, and then you're gonna wanna make sure you get these settings right. If you get one of these settings wrong, it's gonna throw the whole photo off. So make sure you guys get all these right. You wanna go on layer and select skin tones. Make sure your channel is on RGB. And then you're gonna hit the invert button. Now you're gonna go down to the blending mode and make sure you click add. Next, you wanna make sure your opacity is on 100. Make sure none of these boxes are checked. And then you wanna set your scale to 2 and your offset to 0. After you do that, you're gonna click OK. And the photo is gonna look really weird right now for a quick second. It's just gonna look really grayed out and you're gonna be able to see an outline of your model. So now we're gonna hit the texture layer and then we're gonna click on the blending mode and then you're gonna scroll down to linear light. Boom. So that's basically gonna make the photo look like it's back to normal. So the next thing we're gonna do is click on the skin tones layer. And now we're pretty much gonna soften the lighting and shadows on her face just to make them look a little more appealing. So I'm gonna zoom in here. And then the next thing we're gonna do is hit B on your keyboard. So this is gonna bring up your brush tool. You wanna right click it and make sure you're set to your mixer brush tool. So basically this isn't gonna mix any other color. This is just gonna mix the lighting around her face. So make sure you guys have your brush on clean just so we're not pulling colors and stuff. So now you wanna make sure you have these numbers in your settings. So you wanna have wet to 32, low to 24, mix to 24, and flow to 17. And now if we zoom into her face, what we can do is even out some of the shadows and highlights in her face. So I'm gonna make this brush a little bit bigger. And you also wanna make sure your hardness is set all the way down to 0. Also, I use the bracket tools on my keyboard just to make the brush a little bit bigger and smaller. This is just kind of a shortcut I use to make my workflow faster. And now I'm gonna brush over her face around the corners and cheeks just to really even out the lighting. So just gonna go ever so slightly. And whenever I do edit, I try to keep as much contrast on my model's face. I'm very inspired by makeup looks, so whenever there's a lot of contour on the cheeks, whenever there's a lot of highlight on like the nose and stuff, I try to really bring that kind of stuff out. So I'll really just go over the areas that I think need to be softened a bit. So if there's anywhere where I think the shadows are too harsh or the lighting is too harsh, then I'll kind of just brush over that area a bit. See that the lighting on her forehead does lighten up a bit. I'll try not to do that too much. The areas that I try to soften out the most is basically like the forehead, the cheeks, and a little bit of the chin. And again, you guys can do this as much as you want, however you see fit. There's not really a right or wrong way to do this. I'm gonna make my brush a little smaller, a little more defined. Just go here. Sweet. And then if we do a before and after, you'll see that her skin looks a lot more soft there. And you don't just have to do this on the model's face. You can also do this on the model's arms, legs, or wherever you feel like the lighting needs to be even. So I'm pretty much just going to stick to doing that on her face. So next up, I'm going to click on the texture tool. You can basically use this tool again if you need to correct any small details, like any blemishes or anything. Like I mentioned before, I like to do this in the beginning of the process, but if there's anything that does slip up, you can use this layer to do that. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. And again, I'm going to click Alt on the keyboard to sample on her skin. I'm using the healing brush on my keyboard by using J. And then if there's anything like wrinkles on her skin, you can always edit those out. So, okay, so this is honestly looking pretty good. I'm going to click the before and after just so you guys can see those details. So next, I'm going to click on the texture layer, and then I'm going to hit Command J on my keyboard just to duplicate that. You are going to notice that that does make the photo look very sharp. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to click on the opacity and set that down to 40. You can go a little lower if you feel like you need to. I might go down to 30 just so it doesn't look very textury. And that looks a little bit sharper without looking over the top. So that's honestly pretty good for me. And next, I'm going to click on this layer, and I'm going to rename this Dodge and Burn. Perfect. So next, I'm going to hit O on my keyboard, and that's pretty much going to bring up the Dodge and Burn tool. So first, I'm going to hit Dodge, and then you want to make sure you have these settings. You want to make sure you have your brush as soft as possible. Whenever it comes down to Dodge and Burn, you want to make sure you don't go too over the top. So I'm going to set the hardness down to 0 so it blends in a lot smoother. I'm going to make sure it's set to highlight, and then the exposure, I'm actually going to set that to 4. So like I mentioned before, I'm really inspired by makeup looks, so I'm really going to bring out the details that she already has. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over her nose a little bit. So I'm just going to go over her nose bridge, a little bit on the tip of her nose. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller and really highlight the areas around her nose. Sweet. And then I really like to highlight the areas around her cheeks. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to bring out those details. Again, it is easy to go over the top with Dodge and Burn. So just be careful with how you're doing this. Go over her cheek again over here. Perfect. And then I'm going to go down to her chin. And then I'm going to bring some of the highlights up on her chin. Again, I'm very inspired by makeup looks. So anywhere I can add highlights onto like the model's face, I'll go ahead and do that. And one of the biggest things I like to do as well is bring out the details in the eyes. So again, I'm going to hit O on my keyboard. I'm going to make that smaller. And usually this works better with models with colored eyes. Kenzie does have darker eyes. So I'm just going to go over the details that she already has. So there is a little bit of catch eye here in the corner of her eye. I'm just going to go over that, highlight that. And I might do that a couple times over. Even if the model doesn't have a whole lot of detail in her eyes, you can still make her eyes look very glossy. Again, this is a lot more detail that I'm adding. When you upload these on Instagram, they're going to look a lot more smoother. Perfect. So again, I'm going to go on her under eye, and I'm just going to bring out some of these browns. And again, the whole goal of doing this is to make her eyes look glossy. I'm also going to go in the corner of her eyes around the white areas, and then I'm going to burn that area around her eyes. That sounded awful. I don't want to burn anybody's eyes. I'm going to zoom out, and that honestly looks a lot more detailed to me already. So I'm going to toggle the before and after, and as you can tell, that's already looking a lot better. So again, this is something that I've been playing around with a lot lately. I really like bringing out any details. This does work better with models with colored eyes. Even if her eyes, even if your model's eyes are on the darker side, you can make them look glossy. So if that's something that you guys like, I really recommend this technique. And then I'm going to click O again. I'm going to bring my exposure down a tad bit so I don't overdo this part. And then I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to add some exposure over on her forehead just to kind of bring out her skin tones a little bit more. Perfect. Okay, and that looks pretty good to me. I'm also going to go into her inner eye and add a little bit of highlight here. Again, I'm very inspired by makeup looks, so I know a lot of makeup artists do these kind of looks, really, contoured looks with highlight. So I'm very inspired by that, and I'll honestly try to replicate that within Photoshop. And then you can also highlight other parts of the model. Really, I really like the highlight she's getting here on her shoulder, so I'm just going to bring that a tad out. And then again, my biggest tip when it comes to using this technique is bringing out details that are already there, not really trying to add details that weren't really meant to be there. So I'm just going to bring out details that she already has. I'm gonna make that smaller, and then I'm gonna add some more detail onto her collarbones. So right here, I'm gonna add more highlight. And then I'm gonna go over on her shoulder and do a little bit of that on here as well. So whenever I do dodge and burn, I like to do as much as possible. I'm also gonna add some to her hair. Here she has some highlights in her hair, so I'm just gonna brush over those. I'm gonna set my exposure back to 4, bring that out a little bit more. And then I'm just gonna go over the highlights in her hair and really bring those details out. I'll probably do that a couple times just to really bring that out. And then I'll go over on the other side, do that as well. Boom. And honestly, that looks so much cleaner to me. I'm gonna hit O again, and now I'm gonna click down, and this time I'm gonna burn. So basically the whole concept of dodging and burning, if you guys don't already know, dodging is pretty much adding exposure. So you're pretty much adding highlight to anywhere you want in the image. And then burning is making the image look darker. So you're pretty much bringing the exposure down to that area. So I'm gonna hit O again, make sure my burn tool is selected. And then I'm gonna set the exposure to 4. And I'm gonna keep the range on the highlights. So whenever it comes to burning, I try to do a little bit less of burning, but I'm gonna go over areas that are supposed to be a little bit darker. Another thing that I like to do is contouring the model's face. So first I'm gonna start with her eyebrows, and I'm just gonna go over her eyebrows, make them a little darker, and just pretty much fill them in a little bit. Kenzie's pretty good with her makeup, so I don't have to do too much detail. What I'm really just doing is bringing out the details that she already has. So just fill in her eyebrows a little bit. And then I'm gonna scroll down, and then I'm gonna add a bit to her cheeks. So over here on these darker areas to really bring that contour out. So I'll probably do that. I'll go over that 2 times. Do some on this other cheek. Perfect. And now I'm gonna click that again. I'm gonna set my exposure down to 2. And then I'm just gonna go over her eyeshadow a bit and make that a tad bit darker. Perfect. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around the edge of her face and add a little bit of burn. This pretty much just adds a little bit of dimension to the image. So I'm going to click burn. And then I'm just going to go over this little area around her. And this basically just adds dimension. So I'm just going to go around her face. There's already a little bit of drop shadow on her face from the shadows being casted by her hair. So I'm just going to bring that out a little bit. And then I'm going to go on this side, add a little bit more. I'm going to darken the spot right here just because I really like that contour again. Maybe do a little bit more on this side. Perfect. And honestly, this is looking really freaking good to me already. And then again, I'm going to burn right under her collarbone. Again, just to add a little bit more dimension and really bring that out. I'm actually going to switch back to my highlight tool, and I'm going to bring that collarbone a little bit out. I feel like I can do a little bit more with that. When it comes to dodge and burn, I don't just do this onto models. You can also do this to objects in the photo. So I'm actually gonna do a little bit of dodge and burn onto the background. I really like the whites in the background. So I'm gonna set my exposure to 2, and then I'm gonna make my brush a tad bit bigger, and I'm just gonna highlight over the whites. So I really like the whites within the clay of the location. So I'm just gonna go over that, and I'm gonna bring that out a tad bit. So anywhere there's a little bit of white, I'll really just go over that. Make my brush a little smaller, bring out the background behind her a little more. Bring out these whites, perfect. And I'm basically just adding a little bit more dimension to the location. I'm also gonna zoom into her flower she has here. And there's a little bit of highlights on the flowers, especially on these sunflowers. So I'm just gonna go around them on the edge, just add a little bit more detail to them. Not a whole lot. These are just very minor details, so I'm just gonna keep my exposure to 2. The higher you have this, the more of a difference you'll see. But I'll really just try to keep it on the lower side between 2 and 4, just to have it look as natural and smooth as possible. I'm gonna go down to some of these flowers she's holding down here, go over them as well. Not a huge difference, but it is a little detail that does make the image that much better. Next, I'm gonna do a little bit of burning around the background. So any of the spots that are already a little bit dark, I'm just gonna add a little bit more contrast. So I'm gonna add contrast to some of these spots over here, maybe some up here, on this side right here, and then some on these darker pieces of clay around here. Add a little bit around the white wherever I see these indents. Perfect. Now I'm gonna go on the before and after, and that's a pretty big difference. So you can also click on your dodge and burn layer, and you could really play with the opacity. So if you want to bring that out more, you can bring that up. If I bring that up all the way, you can really see all the spots that we hit. That honestly looks over the top for me, and I would never do that. I'm actually going to bring the opacity down, And I think I'm gonna keep it around 40. So 42 looks pretty good to me, just kind of like playing around with that. And now I'm gonna toggle the before and after. And you can see that's a pretty big difference. So if you guys want to make this look a little bit more poppy, just kind of play with the exposure. It is going to sharpen your image a tad bit, as you guys noticed before, but I really like playing with that. I noticed that anything under 50 is going to look pretty good. It's not going to look too sharp. Once you're done with that, you can honestly just export it through Photoshop. I use JPEG Mini to compress my files, so if I want, I can export it through that. Or if you just click the exit bar, you can actually click save, and then it'll send it back to Lightroom, and you'll be able to save it and export it from Lightroom. So yeah, that is basically how I edit my photos in Photoshop and Lightroom. Just to show you guys the before and after one more time. There it is. That's a pretty big difference. Pretty much if you guys are looking to step up your photography game, if you guys are looking to make better portraits, I really do recommend using the dodge and burn technique as well as the frequency separation. This is honestly the best method I have found to soften skin and also add a lot of detail to your photos. This process is a lot longer, so it honestly will take me between 10 to 20 minutes to edit a single image. But once you get the technique down, it's definitely worth it, especially for Instagram photos. Whenever you do post 1 or 2 images, it does make a huge difference in your portrait. So I really do recommend this technique. If you guys found this technique helpful, make sure you leave a like down below. If you guys have any questions about gear or anything about in this video, make sure you leave a comment down below. If you're brand new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And like always, guys, stay awesome. Peace.